Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel and welcome to a new office space. Today we're just going to be doing a little bit of a chat and stuff because I spent part of this last weekend going to the Bournemouth Writing Festival, and it was my first writing festival that I ever went to. I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to plan. I just kind of did stuff. And so I thought what I would do is kind of discuss a little bit about my experience at the Bournemouth Writing Festival, what I did, why I did it, what I got out of it, what the experiences was like, how much it cost, and hopefully give you an idea of whether or not it's something that you would want to do, or at least help you plan maybe as you think about whether or not it's something that you want to do, if going to a writing festival is ever something that you have considered. So I'm going to be putting chapters in this video with each topic. So basically I'm going to be doing a really quick overview of what I did, then I'm going to go into the talks that I went to, I'm going to do the networking events that I went to, and then I also did a one-to-one session with a lit agent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that experience was like. And then I also am going to do a price breakdown, so how much it cost me for each of those things or all together. And then I'm going to end with kind of would I go again? Would I go to another writing festival again? Those kinds of discussions. So if you're interested in any of those particular points, you can go ahead and jump to them. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. But first off, if you are new around here, hi, I'm Vivian. I'm a researcher and a writer. I am primarily at the moment a nonfiction author. I've published 4 nonfiction books, including 1 textbook, but I have been dabbling in the fiction writing space. I am currently querying my first novel, which I am going under the project title Project Caramel Latte. So I am kind of approaching things from 2 different angles, one of being kind of a budding new fiction author, but the other side being a very established nonfiction writer, and kind of what this experience was like for me going to a writing festival, because it's not something that I've really ever done before. So let's talk a little bit about the Bournemouth Writing Festival more generally. So I got this lovely tote bag while I was there. With lots of small goodies and stuff. So it did technically run from, I think, the 25th to the 27th, so it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. However, I only went on the Saturday. Bournemouth is not very far from where I live here in Salisbury. It's about an hour on the bus, give or take. So it wasn't really that difficult to go in for just one day. And this is a new office because I just recently moved house. I had moved house on the Thursday, so I didn't really have like a whole weekend to spare, but because of the proximity, it meant that I could just pop in for a day. When I was there, I heard that there were a lot of people from very far away in the UK, and then also some people who were international. I never met any of those people. Most of the ones that I met and chatted to were at least relatively local. So they weren't necessarily, some of them were from like right around Bournemouth, but then there were some other ones that were kind of just from generally the south. I don't think I really met anyone further north than London. So I can't speak for the veracity of that claim, but I did hear that, and there were quite a lot of people there, so I could imagine that maybe somebody was further north than that, but I didn't really meet anybody that was from further afield. So the general breakdown of my day was that in the morning I went to what was called a genre breakfast. So I managed to get to Bournemouth by about 9 a.m. And from about 9 to 10, they had sessions that were called genre breakfasts. So throughout Bournemouth, in a couple of different cafes and stuff, there were different people meeting up according to which genre. I thought I was going to the fantasy one because my book is a fantasy mystery story. Turned out it wasn't the fantasy one, it was a flash fiction one. And it wasn't just me who made that mistake. There was another 1 or 2 people who showed up thinking it was fantasy. So basically some of the stuff was a little bit difficult to kind of parse out. Then I went to 2 talks. They were both in the same building, luckily, so I didn't really have to move. The 2 talks were in St. Peter's Church, which was actually really cool because in between the talks, it meant that I got to go and visit three literary icons who were buried there. Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, and Mary Wollstonecraft are all obviously buried in the same plot because of the Wollstonecraft family. And so, yeah, I was able to go and visit three amazing literary icons, two of which are women. So that was really exciting. And then after the two talks, I went to a networking lunch, hung out and chatted with people until about 3 o'clock. And then at that point, I went over to where I was going to do the one-to-one session with my agent. And then as soon as that session was over, I went home. So I was leaving Bournemouth at around 4. So I was there from about 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Let's chat about each of these sessions. So the thing with going to talks is that they're going to be hit or miss, and that's just going to be the case no matter what event you're going to. I used to go to academic conferences quite a lot, and again, it's very similar. It's very hit or miss about whether or not it's going to be useful or interesting or thought-provoking. And obviously, the Writers' Festival is not closed to only certain types of writers. It's open. If you show up and pay, you can come. So it doesn't matter how new you are to writing. It doesn't matter how established you are. You can still show up. It means that the people giving the talks probably didn't really know where to aim the talk for and kind of had to guess. The best person who I saw deal with this, I mean, I only went to two, but one of the people that I saw deal with this was Paul Draper. So the first talk that I went to was given by Paul Draper, and he did a short steps into the dark. So it was all about writing short fiction with dark themes. I found this one really helpful, and part of that was that at the beginning of the talk, he had us raise our hands based on the level of writing that we do. So how much time are we devoting to writing on a regular basis? I liked this approach because it wasn't questioning whether or not you're published. It doesn't question how much money you make from it or how quote unquote successful you might be. It was more about how active are you in writing. And I think that's a better way of judging experience rather than something like publication, because somebody can write a lot and know a lot about it and not be very interested in publishing. And it meant that a lot of his time was spent more on the nuances of the discussion, and he still talked about some of the more kind of common basic bits, but he just didn't linger on them. He didn't spend a lot of time on them. So I really appreciated that. I did learn some stuff from this. Some of it was also just names, a lot of authors being listed. And at the end of the talk, he actually had several slides of sample pieces to pick up. So anthologies of short stories, of dark short stories, writers to read, and then also books on the craft of writing horror or dark themes that you could purchase if you want, which I really appreciate because it meant that somebody was able to kind of go, these are the things that I recommend. Because especially with like writing craft books, like the how-to books, anyone can write those, right? Like, and it takes somebody who really knows what they're doing in order to be able to read them and then go, oh, actually this one is useful and this one isn't. So it was nice to have that kind of breakdown. So I am going to be emailing him in order to get the slides so that way I can make sure that I have actually noted all of the stuff properly, because he did go a little fast through those because of the fact that he was willing to just send us the slides if we asked for them. So this first talk I really enjoyed. I thought it was great. I thought it was wonderful. I learned quite a lot. The second talk that I went to was Let's Make a Murder by Andrea Cordani. This one was very structured for newbies, or at least that's how it felt to me. It was really, really basic. So, for example, the very first slide and information that she gives is what makes a murder mystery: setting, victim, sleuth, suspects, investigation, resolution. That to me wasn't new. That wasn't that was kind of real basic. That was kind of, I feel like, how I would have started if I didn't know what I was doing. And then this one was also a lot more workshop-y. So she had given us little cards and we went through each of these things, the setting, victim, sleuth, and we were supposed to jot down notes on like our murder mystery as we were crafting them as we went along, which I think probably was really useful for some people. I'm not criticizing that approach, but for me, it wasn't the way I think. I have a hard time just kind of sitting down and then someone going, go, be creative. Like, it's not where I'm in the mode of. So some of it I was able to generate and some of it I really struggled with, especially with the sleuth card. Instead of just jotting down bullet points like we did with all the other ones, she wanted you to write like a short scene. And again, that's just, I can't just write like that, and especially not enough to want to share. So yeah, it felt very amateur to me, which is fine, because like I said, it was open to anybody and it could have been very useful for somebody who was amateur. It just wasn't very useful to me. So I ended up actually slipping out as soon as the Q&As started, also because we were going over time and I was getting hungry because it was right around lunch. So as far as the talks are concerned, again, I only went to 2, so I can't really speak to a lot of the other ones that were on or any of the workshops that were present. I do know that there was like 1 or 2 that I would have liked to have gone to. There was, for example, a more like workshop-y thing with mystery, so I don't know if that would have been more helpful. Backstory techniques for characters I thought might have been really useful, because I always feel like I'm not very good at it, although apparently I'm fine, which we'll talk about later. Yeah, I think there were definitely ones in this that I would have liked to go to if I was on a different day. There are ones for working with a literary agent, publishing, understanding the publishing business. I think those all would have been really useful talks to go to, but they were on the Sunday and I wasn't there. So I could imagine that some of it would have been a lot more useful than others, but that's just the nature of talks. But the general structure of it was fine. Both of the talks that I went to went over time, which could have been just the writers not really being used to having to stick to a time frame. Again, I used to go to academic conferences where you only have 20 minutes to give the talk and then 10 minutes for Q&A. And I used to be really good at sticking to time. Not everybody was. So it's not abnormal for that to happen for talks, but it probably would have been better if they had been more practiced at it. Maybe that was a time frame that they were given, although the length of the time seemed fine. It seemed good. So, you know, it's just practice of what people are used to. So yeah, I mean, I probably, if I had been around for longer, I definitely would have gone to more of them. I definitely would have gone to more of the talks and workshops. So I think that probably could have been worth it, but it's one of those where you'd probably have to look at what talks are on in order to decide whether something's really vibing with you. Now, let's talk about the networking events. So I went to 2 different networking events. The first one was a genre breakfast starting at 9 a.m. and the other one was a lunch at the Cozy Club. The genre breakfast was odd. So the lunches were just kind of general. It was like, here are the various places you can get food and there will be people there. I wish they had had that also for the breakfasts. The genre breakdown, I get why they were doing that as a way of trying to encourage different kind of conversation and more specified conversation on a particular genre topic. However, there wasn't really any genres that fit my nonfiction writing, which is fine. It's very specific. That's probably not going to be something that you're going to find very readily available at a writing conference, so I get it. But also the other writing that I do is cross-genre, so I didn't know whether to go to the mystery or to the fantasy. I ended up settling on fantasy because one of the talks that I went to was the murder mystery one, so I figured I could get a little dose of both if I go to the fantasy event. However, I was wrong, and it wasn't a fantasy event, and I wasn't the only one that thought that it was that. The details of when certain things were and what they were was sometimes really difficult to parse out. And this was an example of where it went wrong for me, as well as for one other person who showed up to this genre breakfast. It ended up being a flash fiction one. which was fine. I had a lovely time talking about Flash fiction, and I learned some really interesting things about Flash and some interesting, like, different versions of Flash fiction that I'm going to be looking up and reading more about. So I did learn a lot, and I did gather some stuff from it, which was super wonderful and helpful, but it wasn't what I thought it was, and I think that's also something to kind of note. For the lunch, because the lunch event started at noon, they went from noon to 2, but the talk that I did went over time, so I wasn't like leaving there until like 12:40, I think. Yeah, so the talk that I went to ran over, so it was 11:45 to 12:45, so I wasn't really getting to the lunch spot until like 1-ish. And so when I showed up, people had like already finished eating. There wasn't a flow to it like I thought there would be because of the talks running over that time. I assumed that that meant that there would be people coming in and out of that lunch space. And it wasn't. I was the only one that showed up after the noon time start. It was at a restaurant, so I had to like try to flag people down in order to order food. It was just really awkward, and it meant that all the seats were already taken, people were already in conversation, and it took a while for me to like budge into the conversation. It was just awkward. So I don't know how that really went. The breakfasts were a little bit easier to get into because it was only 1 hour. It was also at a coffee shop. And also one of the benefits of having the genre breakdown meant that it was smaller, or at least it was at where I went. There weren't as many people at the Flash fiction one as there might have been at one of the other ones. It meant that it was easier. Like, someone did join us a bit late at the breakfast, and it was very easy to be like, hey, pull up a chair, tell us about yourself, because there was only like 4 of us. Or it was just easier to join at the table than a really long table with a lot of people there. So it was just a little awkward for that. I think the timing just wasn't great. They maybe should have made it so no talks were scheduled during that time frame if they were going to have it be a little bit more like sit down, or maybe put them at all pubs where people can more easily flow around. I don't know. It didn't quite work, I think, for the lunch networking. That's just how I felt, because I know that I felt really, really awkward when I first came in, to the point where I thought about leaving, like, really quick. I thought about leaving because I showed up. I was struggling to find any kind of stuff. They took a photo while someone was trying to talk to me, and then everyone left. And it was just like me and 2 other people suddenly. And I was just like, I just want to leave. So I ended up getting more comfortable once it was the smaller group of people. But it was really awkward when I first sat down, and that is kind of off-putting, especially for people that really struggle in social situations where networking is supposed to be a little bit of an easier time for that. The networking was, again, hit or miss. The breakfast worked really well. I had a great time. I learned a lot. And I think because it was specific to a particular genre, it meant that we were talking about that. As much as I really hated the genre specificity idea, it did mean that we had a topic to discuss, while at the lunch it was very like, I don't know. I don't know, maybe I just had a bad group, or me showing up late just sent a weird vibe and I was already feeling awkward, so I acted awkward. I don't know, okay? But that's just how it felt. Last up, we are going to talk about my one-to-one session with an agent. Now, I have never done something like this before. The only agent discussion I have ever had was with an agent who did read my stuff and asked for it and that kind of thing. So this is the first time where I've just sent it to a random person, basically, in order to discuss. Now, a little bit about how this works. The festival advertised that they had these one-to-one sessions, and they had listed the 5 agents, I think it was 5 agents that they had available throughout the whole time. I found out about this festival quite late, so when I was looking, most of them were already all booked up, which is fair enough. I found out about it late. There were still, I think, 2 available. Luckily, the one of the 5 that would have been the best person to send my stuff to was one of the ones still available. So I felt very lucky in that regard, and to be honest, this was the entire reason why I went to this festival. I found out about this session. The one of the 5 that would have been a good fit was still available. It felt a bit fate driven, so I went ahead and did it and scheduled everything around the fact that I was going. This is why I went on the Saturday, was because that was when that agent was there. I ended up meeting with Oscar Jensen Smith. I don't mind mentioning his name because he was great. I had a really wonderful time, and I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of it. But essentially, all I had to do was I sent him my querying package. So he got my querying letter, he got my synopsis, and he got my first, I think, 3 chapters. But I sent him all of that stuff. It was already pre-packaged and prepped because I have been querying, so it was really easy for me to send it off to him. So he did not read the full manuscript. He did not read a lot more into it. He got literally what I would be querying with. I do have to note that because there were only 5 available, I do say that Oscar Jensen Smith was the best fit, but that was the best fit out of the 5. I don't know if I would have sent this stuff to him had I just been generally querying, and I think he knew that as well, so I don't think it was really necessarily a problem. Obviously, this is the situation that we're in. So that's just a note that if you are doing this, you are going to be limited in the agents that you are sending to. If you do a one-to-one session with an agent like this, please do not expect them to turn around and give you representation. That's not really what this is for. This was for feedback on the querying process, feedback on your writing, feedback on your material, because so many agents just don't respond or give you form rejection letters. It's really difficult to figure out where you went wrong, if you went wrong, because it could be that they just didn't want it and it's subjective, or it could be that you did something wrong and you don't really know. So it's purely that. It's purely to answer questions, to get feedback, to figure out what's going wrong if something's going wrong. So that's what you should be taking this for. And that's what I was taking it for. And it worked out really well. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the advice that he gave me because that advice is very specific to my work and it might not necessarily fit yours. But one of the things that I did appreciate was that he told a story about somebody who kind of kept changing really big, important parts of the narrative to fit what like classes were saying or what, you know, certain feedback was referring to, like kind of general feedback on things. And once he was able to like pin down what this person actually wanted to say, it crafted a much better narrative. Basically, what he was doing was trying to explain that you shouldn't just do shit for the sake of doing shit because that's what people say you should do. You should listen to your own narrative voice. And I really appreciated this bit of advice before he got into his own feedback. I do have to say I would say a good like 90% of what he said I could totally vibe with, and I see what he's saying and I see the arguments that he was making. He said a lot of really good things, really wonderful things about my writing. He gave me some critiques, which is really nice. He gave me advice on the actual letter, the querying letter, of how to position my story in order to best demonstrate its sellability. So those are all really good. I also had questions about querying for both nonfiction and fiction, which he gave me that advice. He answered my questions. He was very nice, very welcoming, very warm. I really appreciated his presence. I really liked him. I liked his feedback, and I liked how professional he was. So I would say that if you are in a position to be able to do something like this, and you are similarly kind of just getting form rejections with no feedback, this might be a really nice way to find out how you're doing, you know, like whether or not it's you, whether it's them, you know, whether there's anything really that you can do. There is one thing that I do want to mention, and this is kind of an accessibility thing, but all of the agents were in the same room. I was kind of imagining that they would all be in like little separate cubbies or something, but they were all in one big room, which meant that there were ambient discussions that I could hear. Luckily, it wasn't too loud or too distracting, but for people with audio processing struggles, I could imagine that this wouldn't have been ideal and would have made it a lot harder to kind of take in the advice. I also felt really awkward answering certain questions because I was conscious of the fact that I could have been overheard. It didn't feel private. Not necessarily that anything needed to be private because it is like a stranger that I was talking to, but you know what I mean? Like it felt like people could easily eavesdrop, and so it didn't feel comfortable of a space. But that's just me, and it is something to keep in note of if you are someone with audio processing stuff, that maybe asking about the actual room setup beforehand might be a really useful thing for you to think about. So let's talk about price. The tickets for the Bournemouth Festival were a little weird. I have not gone to other writing festivals, but I have looked very seriously into them. It's one of the reasons why I did this one day thing, as well as the agent stuff, was that it meant that I was able to kind of get a feel for how this stuff worked and how I felt about it when looking at other stuff. So some of the other writing festivals that I have seen, you buy a ticket and that covers a lot of things all at once. And there are various tickets for various, say, levels of what you want to do. So one of them that I saw included accommodation, included like breakfast at the accommodation. It covered a certain number of talks, and it covered a certain number of workshops, a certain number of, you know, meet and greet things, you know, that kind of stuff. This one was purely like a la carte. So everything had to be purchased separately. If I was traveling in from much further, then I would have had to book my own accommodation as well. It wasn't part of it. I don't remember seeing anything on the website for like a joint ticket price of just like, this is a day pass that gets you into X number of talks or workshops. So I think they could have benefited from something like that. It's something to keep in mind for events like this, that you can't just kind of rock up on the day and decide what you want to do. You kind of had to plan way far ahead of which talk. I had to keep looking at maps. I'm not super familiar with Bournemouth, so I had to keep looking at maps of like, wait, so how far is this building from that building? If I'm going to go to this other talk, am I going to have time? You know, that kind of stuff. It was something that I had to like kind of just do like way ahead of time, instead of, you know, sitting in a room and then going, okay, well, what's on next? What do I feel like doing and where is it? It meant that I had to kind of do it all ahead of time. Again, when I would go to academic conferences, this wasn't really a thing. You don't have to pay per talk, so you can just show up. And often that's how I would do things. I would have a rough idea of what I wanted to do, but it wouldn't be ironed out and, you know, clad. So I could change my mind. I wasn't able to change my mind on these. I had to do what I had predetermined because that's what I had already paid for. There were some free talks, but it was really difficult to tell which ones were free and which ones were paid for. I got my ticket checked on some of them, but not all of them. So, you know, I don't know how easy it would have been to just slide in. But some of the talks were free, some of them were paid for. It was really difficult to tell which one. The paid for ones were £10 each, which isn't massive, but like I said, some of them probably are more worth it than other ones, and you're not going to know that ahead of time. The one-to-one session with the agent was £70. None of the breakfast or lunch networking events were covered, so I had to buy my own food. So probably altogether I paid 102, 105, let's round up and say about £105, not including the bus price to go down there. So that's the one-to-one session, 2 of the talks, which was, so it was 90 quid for the ticketed events. I bought coffee at the breakfast. I had to buy lunch at the Cozy Club. So altogether, that probably was about 105, give or take. So that's something to keep in mind. If that was for a whole weekend, I would have had to buy more of the ticketed talks. So that would have been another probably 30 quid if I did 3. I guess it depends on how many. I don't know. I'd have to look at the schedule. And again, that's the other bad thing. I wish they just had a ticket price for just you get to go. But this isn't the only festival that does that. So it's something to keep in mind. So yeah, about 105 with food. But for just the ticketed items, I spent 90 quid in order to go. So the biggest price was the agent, although I do have to say that was probably the most useful thing that I went to, purely because it was actually literally geared to me. Like, it was specialized advice based off of something that was actually mine that I had written, while the other things were general talks. They weren't geared specifically to me. So obviously it was nice. And £70, it was a 15-minute conversation with the agent. It feels very excessive, but compared to the price that I've seen at other events, as well as doing mentorships or kind of paying for that, you know, outside of a writing festival, I think they tend to be more expensive than that. So it's something to keep in mind, like, to look at what those prices are and judge whether or not they seem worth it. Do know that it is specialized. So while it is 15 minutes, it was 15 minutes specifically on my thing that I wrote and my career, not general conversation about how to query. So that was really useful. Would I go again? I don't know. I think for the Bournemouth one specifically, I would probably maybe do another one day like this, like I did this time. However, it would have to be very dependent on what was going on. As far as writing festivals in general, it has piqued my interest and I'm interested in going to other ones. I have had the Harrogate Crime Festival on my dream to do for quite some time now. So maybe I will finally get around to going to that. I definitely want to try some other festivals out. And it might be I think it's worth giving a go if you haven't done it before. It's just a matter of maybe figuring out one that's a little bit more local, maybe a little bit smaller if it's your first one. Just kind of testing out the waters and seeing it just as a test and not expecting the world out of it. But that's kind of my advice for most things because I'm a pessimist. So anyway, that is my experience at the Bournemouth Writing Festival and Writing Festival in general. Thank you for listening to me discuss this. Let me know what writing festivals you've been to and whether or not you recommend them in the comments, because maybe if there's one in the UK that I'd feel like going to, I will. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye!